As an automotive journalist, you will have those times which you get to drive a car that no matter how many times you get behind the wheel, it just doesn't stir your soul the way the manufacturer hoped it would. And not that long ago, I was in that same situation driving a compact luxury crossover. However, not even a year later, the manufacturer who makes that car has sent it to me once again with hopes that this time, my opinions might change a little bit. You know, I've often likened the idea of being an automotive YouTuber, journalist, videographer, whatever you want to call yourself, is like going through one of the biggest games of speed dating that you could possibly imagine. On some days, you may be driving cars where it feels like the manufacturer's going to have to pry the keys out of your cold, dead hands before you ever think about giving that vehicle up. And then there's other times, like what I'm facing right now, where you just don't want to give certain cars a second chance. But you know what? The opportunities are there, and needs must. And therefore, I decided to take a different approach to driving the Lexus UX for 2023, because the last time I looked at it, I was way too critical of this thing. Hybrid or not, the UX to me, at least what I said before, is by far my least favorite Lexus that has ever been made. And I know there's been some bad ones. Every car company has them. But I'll tell you one thing, Lexus seems to have lightened the load on this car a little bit by, number one, making the UX hybrid only for 2023 and 2024. Now that should put a sizable less strain on your wallet, wouldn't you say? Well, I should think not when you find out that if you want one loaded out like the one I'm driving right now, it's gonna set you back between $40,000 to $45,000. But let's not forget here that this is still a Lexus product, even though in many minds that is a huge chunk of money for what is in most places not a very big car. But on the flip side, this is still a Lexus we're talking about after all. It's quiet, it's comfortable, I don't really have to shout to talk to anybody even at freeway speeds, and the visibility is, well, it is what you make of it. The windshield's pretty good size. Out the sides I can see perfectly well, but out the back, well, that windshield looks like it's about as big as a piece of paper, so a little bit on the thin side. However, the stress on your wallet will also be lifted even further when you find out that, now being a hybrid only, Lexus says that even on this car's worst day with all-wheel drive and all the options it's got in it, like the one I'm driving right now, they say it will still get over 40 miles to the gallon. I think that's something to smile about, don't you? Lexus, I think, still might have a screw loose or two, because somehow they've put a Sport Plus mode in this thing, and they've combined it with something they call active sound control. So what you do is you twist the dial up into Sport Plus, you turn on the ASC, you drop it down a couple gears, and listen to this. But what I found sort of humorous about the UX is the fact that even though it is a hybrid, and it is by no means the fastest thing in a straight line with only 4 cylinders and a giant battery underneath and a lagging rubber bandy CVT transmission in the middle, there is still just a slight whiff of sportiness to this thing. And I'm not just talking about the fact that it wears the F-Sport badge, which that does help, by the way, but with all-wheel drive, I find that the steering is a lot heavier. It is a little bit limp-wristed when you're driving around town, but at the same time, if you need to make a high-speed maneuver in such a small car with a short wheelbase, it'll definitely get out of its own way, and that is no joke. You can pull into a sharp corner, give it a little bit of gas, just take off like a shot. Okay, that's a little bit excessive, but still, you kind of get where I'm going with that. Now, for a car that's actually smaller than a Lexus IS, surprisingly, the UX is still trying to make quite the statement for itself, despite being, again, the entry into the Lexus crossover family. And this particular one's putting on quite the show, wearing the ultrasonic blue paintwork and sporting all of the F-Sport available goodies. But on the flip side, it is still trying to make more of an aggressive case for itself, with the inner workings of the spindle grille being reworked and finished in a darker color. Same thing with the little inserts here on the outside of the bumper. The headlights have more blacked out inner housings. They're almost all LED, like your main bulbs, your daytime running lights, and so on. But your turn signals, at least here on the front, are incandescent. That's a little bit of a downer, again, when you're spending this kind of money. But for the money, you also do get quite a bit of tech. The intuitive park assist is actually an option in this case. Kind of surprising, again, being so fully loaded out, but you still get the newest version of Lexus's safety sense system. So you have the adaptive radar cruise control, forward collision warning, lane keep assist, and so on. So it is a bit of a trade-off. The design might not be my favorite, but there's no denying that Lexus is still trying pretty hard here. And if it wasn't crazy enough finding out that this little crossover is still smaller than the smallest four-door sedan currently made by the same manufacturer, it is still quite an eye-catcher though, because Lexus is still trying to be unique in their own way. And you can see it in the side profile. In a darker color like this ultrasonic blue here, like I mentioned, you can see all the indentions, you can see the little wraps that go around the wheel arches, you can see all the swoops that go down the side. It really does create almost more of an artistic idea, which is not a word I would particularly use with something like this, but still, you can see that they're aiming to differentiate themselves in this category. And speaking of being different, I highly would recommend opting for the F-Sport package when it comes to your choice of curb appeal, because even though they look way tinier than their numbers would suggest, because these are 18-inch wheels, I love the darker finish on these. They're wrapped in 225/50 series Bridgestone Turanzas, and I will say, even though they look small and somewhat plain, at least they thought to put them in a darker color so it accents nicely with a color like this. Now, if somehow after all of this you're still thinking that this thing is overpriced and all bark and no bite, well, just dig a little bit deeper. For example, the mirrors, power folding, they're a little bit larger as well, which is kind of nice, and they got a little bit of gloss black on the top. They got the turn signal on the side with things like your blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, as to be expected. I love things like the optional black roof on this one. It kind of gives the illusion that it has a panoramic sunroof on it, even though, as you can see clearly, it only has a standard size roof up top. And of course, speaking of features, you do still get the ubiquitous Lexus Advanced Keyless Access, but there's still a slightly fancy looking key. I would have maybe liked to see something more unique at this point, because I know Toyota's starting to do that. But at the same time, you got lock, unlock, the power tailgate in this case, and panic, not to mention the releasable key that comes out of the bottom of the car, which you kind of have to hunt and peck for behind the door handle in order to find it if this key were to lose power. But all the same, on the front two door handles, you have the same touchpad, so just have your key, grab the handle. I must say the door's shut with a nice soft thunk too, and that's also a nice plus. And of course, you touch the little rip portion at the front, and although I may have taken a liking to the front and artistic side profiles of this thing, the rear end, I don't know that I could say the same thing about. There's so many things going on back here, but the first thought that came to my mind was I feel like I'm looking at Hank Hill's rear end. Just absolutely nothing until you get to this tiny little bumper down here at the bottom, and even that is just black plastic. There's no color coded, there's not really anything unique going on down there. I'm happy that there's no fake exhaust finishers on this thing. That is definitely a plus. But also, in their pursuit of being unique, I feel like Lexus took a look at the airline industry. Look at this, they've got winglets right here on its rear haunches on the outside of the taillights. Look like they came right off of a 737. There is, however, a nice LED light bar that goes all the way across the back, so at night it does have a bit of a more unique characteristic on the road. The taillights, just like the front, they're almost all LED, so you've got your LED main bulbs, reversing lights. However, the turn signals are still incandescent, even though they sort of behave like LEDs when they're turned on. There is still a power tailgate back here, as I mentioned, and also as part of the optional intuitive park assist, it is replicated on the back as well. And also, one thing I really have enjoyed, despite its smaller rear end, is the fact that although you have the button on the key and the latch under the tailgate, there is still a hands-free access system. And of course, when the tailgate opens up into what seems like a relatively small space, we are greeted by another mess. Yes, I'm still using all of my detailing supplies to try to demonstrate just how big, or in this case, how small the rear end of some vehicles are. Now, I know you could fold down these 60/40 seats and make this trunk space a lot bigger, but just behind the rear seats is 17.1 cubic feet of space, which is quite diminutive when you consider that something like a Volvo XC40 has over 20 cubic feet of space. So you are going to be sacrificing some space here in the rear. Not necessarily the worst thing, but as far as being a class leader, well, this is far from it. And if its outward appearances weren't enough to convince you that this thing is not just some hopped up CHR or Corolla Cross, then getting inside the UX does really remind one that this is, despite its diminutive size, still a true Lexus product through and through. Now, there are some bits of the interior that I will say are relatively familiar. This one being the F-Sport. The steering wheel, for example, it's big and thick. It's got the red stitching around the inside. It's got the bigger grips up at the top. It's perforated on the sides, which is kind of nice. Leather wrapped and heated at the same time, which is kind of surprising, being that this is the entry into the Lexus crossover market. But at the same time, the other details are all there. The red leather on this thing is just, I love it. I'm a sucker for red interiors in general, but with the black accent in the middle, it kind of reminds me of like an Acura A-Spec kind of look, which is definitely not a bad thing. That's also one of my favorite interiors. The seats, a little bit more aggressively bolstered. They kind of hug you around your midsection a little bit more. So whether you want that or not, that's completely up to you. For me, I do enjoy it. I am a little bit on the slimmer side as well. They are heated and ventilated in this case, and you would expect so, paying over 40 grand for something like this option the way it is. But speaking of options, or rather details in this case, even though Lexus hasn't changed the formula for the UX all too much compared to the last time we saw it, there are some finite details and some bigger ones that in this case really do add up to one much bigger difference. Now, while the inside of this UX, for the most part, exudes that sort of familiar aura that we've seen with pretty much every Lexus product that we've looked at within the past couple years or so, those of you who are keen-eyed or not will notice the one huge difference that has happened to the interior of not just this particular car, but the UX in general. And if you haven't seen it already, well, then you're blind, because it is a huge difference. But the thing that's been kind of bothering me about this interior, and I'm not trying to be negative Nancy, but still, when I think of a Lexus, I think of the best quality that Toyota Motor Company can put out. And if this is the best they can do, honestly, I think they still need to have a little bit of an adjustment here and there. For starters, I mean, on the steering wheel, I still love the design. Familiar, as I said, we've seen it in pretty much every Lexus car that I've come across. But like the material, you know, leather wrapped, perforated, that's all cool, but the material, not quite up to my standards. It's not as supple as I'd like it to be, and in some cases, it kind of just feels a little plasticky, if I'm honest. Same thing with the paddles. You know, they're painted silver and they're nice and big, but you pull one, just plasticky is the same word that keeps coming back to me. That said, the buttons are all familiar: radar cruise, Bluetooth, voice recognition, the arrow pad to adjust your digital gauge cluster. And speaking of gauge adjustments, you still do have the one little button that allows you to shift the central part of said gauge cluster off to the side to be able to read different bits of information a little bit more. And the same can be said with not only the power adjustments for the steering column, but the buttons over here to the left of that column being your active sound control, and the button to adjust and or turn off your giant heads-up display. And like I said, you'd have to be full-on blind to miss the brand new 12.3-inch high-definition infotainment display that's now been added for 2023 and into 2024. Now, you can still get a more basic UX hybrid with an 8-inch screen, but nobody wants that. This is what you want right here, and it has everything. It has the new connected services system where you can subscribe to a cloud-based navigation system. It has Android Auto. It has Apple CarPlay, which unfortunately, when you're not subscribed, are wired in. However, you can still get this with wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. So that is a nice little option there. And it even comes with your own personal assistant. Check this out. Hey, Lexus,
How can I help you?
I'm too cold.
Setting the driver's seat temperature to 72 degrees.
Now, how cool is that? Now, while having your own personal assistant inside of your infotainment is definitely a major upgrade compared to the UX that we looked at last time, everything else in here is pretty much exactly the same, albeit styled a little bit differently, than the Toyota Highlight system, which ironically we were looking at on a little bit of a different screen, a little bit bigger one, in the new Sequoia not that long ago. All the icons are right here on the side, everything from navigation, audio, phone connectivity, your vehicle settings like your energy flow if you want to see where your power is going in your UX Hybrid, and then of course you have general settings where we were before. The only thing that I did not notice comparing the Toyota system to this is the Android Auto icon. Either I was the blind one and I completely missed it, or it just wasn't there. But the cool part is, if you don't like using Android Auto, which I don't know why you would, it's a much more reputable system compared to any navigation that I've used recently, you can just revert right back to the Lexus system and it goes back to exactly how it was before. The only thing that also is kind of weird about this system is you get a backup camera, but that's not the weird part. Take a listen to what's going on right now. Do you not hear that? That is still the most bizarre chime I've ever heard. I've heard of cars with backup chimes. I've heard of ones that sound like an alien spacecraft. This one sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi horror movie. It's just weird. But all that being said, the camera is much bigger now. The intuitive park assist that we've got on this one works perfectly. So all in all, this system is definitely a huge win compared to the one from last time. And if just the fact that this whole upper console has changed completely isn't enough to sway you a little bit, one of the things that definitely is a nice addition along with the screen and all of its ancillaries is a 10-speaker Lexus audio system. Now, I know it's not JBL, it's not Mark Levinson, and it's not anything brand name, but I'll tell you what, for what it is a hell of a system for such a small car. And by far and away, one of the other huge changes that's happened in here, if the screen wasn't big enough for you, is the fact that with that new infotainment, you no longer have to deal with the quite controversial Lexus remote touch interface. So gone is that gaudy little vibrating mouse pad that never seemed to know which direction to go. And in its place is just your heated and ventilated seat controls with your steering wheel heating, your gear shifter, EV mode, brake hold, a couple of nice cup holders, and even there is room for an optional wireless charger hidden there up under the dash. So everything now is so much cleaner, and that is probably the biggest praise that I can give for what Lexus has done here for 2023. And if you're the sort of man or woman who thinks that there is still just not enough space for you up in the front, well, then you haven't sat in the back of the Lexus UX. I'm gonna tell you right now, if you're anything close to, over, or under 6 feet tall, and you're sitting behind a driver or passenger who's around the same size, well, needless to say, their back is going to be quite uncomfortable because my knees are pushed about halfway into the back of this driver's seat. There's just not enough room back here. And really the only way I could think about making this comfortable is either coming at the expense of your driver or passenger, or you just don't sit back here at all. However, if you do decide you want to be in the back seat, or your friends do for that matter, well, they have 2 USB-C charging ports at the base of the center console, and they also have a nice little armrest here in the middle with 2 sizable drink holders. The only thing nice I can say about this interior is that even though my legs have pretty much no space, and whether you're a man or a woman, you may have to spread a little bit more than you like, the headliner is actually indented for taller folks like myself. So, I mean, headroom, good. Armrest, good. Knee room, not so good. And on that note, this now wraps up our review and drive of the 2023 Lexus UX250 Hybrid F-Sport all-wheel drive. Now, I know I made this car out to be something not so great in the last time I saw it, but I'll tell you, after driving it now, my opinions have actually changed quite a bit. I finally understand the reason why somebody would buy one of these. Albeit that price tag is still a little bit steep, so if you are interested in a Lexus UX, I would highly suggest taking a look at a lesser expensive model before you start adding on the options. But in the end, it's practical, it's comfortable, it's got plenty of technology, and above all, it's it's now more efficient than ever being hybrid only. But at the end of the day, guys, if you enjoyed this video or perhaps you learned something about the UX today, please give this video a thumbs up, and also while you're at it, hit the subscribe button down below, because trust me, I appreciate the support and I want to continue doing videos on stuff like this in the future. At the end of the day though, my thanks goes right back to Lexus USA for sending us out the UX one more time to see if my opinions have actually changed. But in the end, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see y'all next time. Take care, everybody, and stay safe.